Okay, you actually pronounced my name almost perfectly. No, not many people do that, so thank you for that. As you said, I work with V7, and we basically do this platform that is supposed to be everything for machine learning, uh, primarily computer vision. So you get to annotate your media and create data sets on the platform, then use those annotations, those data sets to train your models, and then you will even run your models and run inference on them. So there's a lot of moving parts there, uh, which is why I will be talking about one method we employ to try and eliminate breaking those moving parts when we change something, and that is end-to-end testing. I love testing in general, and I love testing in Elixir. We had a talk about testing this morning. I believe the person's name is Jeffrey. I'm sorry, I'm really bad with names. And he mentioned how data manipulation in tests should not be stopped in Elixir. Like, that is the one exception where you don't really employ mocks or anything like that, because it's really simple to create actual data due to the sandbox approach that Ecto provides to check out a transactional connection for your test and run tests in isolation. So what if this sandbox approach is really great in unit and integration tests and really fast and works amazingly well. But what if you have like a different front-end client, say a Vue framework, which is what we use at V7, or another, or a React framework or something like that, a separate project, even separate repository, and we want to do end-to-end testing. Well, then we have to manage our own data, create, example scenarios for different users, different, teams, anything like that. And then that data management is hard and gets really complicated really quick. So ideally, we would be using something like XUnit. So you would have a setup block where you check out a sandbox connection, and after the test is done, you check it back in, and your database is reset, and you don't have to deal with this. And the actual fact is that we can. There's this plug given by Phoenix Ecto, which you can use, and it does almost exactly this. When you add this to your endpoint somewhere into the pipeline, you get basically three things. The first thing is a post action onto your API at the specified URL. So in this case, it's at sandbox. And when you post to this path, you get back, basically the process checks out a sandbox connection for you and gives you its ID. And then you can use this ID, and this is the second feature that you get, and add it to a header to the header of every request you make to that API. And then that request, the process for that is that request, because if we remember, like Phoenix requests, each of them is a separate process. That process gets allowed into the sandbox as you would with an XUnit test. And then that process is part of that sandbox. And then when your test is over, you can send that header to, again, the sandbox URL, but this time with a delete request, and that sandbox connection is checked in and the database is reset. And this all works just like that, just by adding this thing. So general usage for this would be, like most test suites have a before each and after each block. So like the general idea is in the before each block, you make the post request to check out a sandbox. You do some sort of interception to add the header to all your other requests during the test. So that includes requests within the test and requests within the code being tested. And then you send a delete request to the endpoint in the after each block to reset the state, so to say. So in this workshop, I will attempt to do exactly that and attempt to set up the full scenario for this. So I will add the plug. I will add some bonus stuff to make all this work a bit better, because just the plug, it's great, but it's not everything you would need in the usual test. I will set up an entire end-to-end testing suite using Cypress, and then we will write some tests and see how that works when everything is set up. So why I went with Cypress, I listed a lot of reasons here, but basically it's the one I personally like the most and find the most useful and easiest to work with. So yeah, that's what I went with. You can easily add custom commands. It has this interception feature where it really easily handles all requests made by both the code being tested and the code executing the test. So everything just works out of the box and with very little trouble. So that's what we will be using. So yeah, let's do it. The code is available at this URL. I will give like 20 seconds for you to try and copy it, but it is posted in the description of this talk. And like if you can't follow along, the repository is open, and I will be adding to it both documentation and more things as time goes on. So feel free to take a look. And let's just see what is in that repository. So what I've created here is a backend app. It's a simple to-do app. So it has an API to register, log in, and create and delete to-dos. This is the backend with the fully set up end-to-end features. So the plug is added, everything else is added. And then this is the backend with none of it set up. It's just the backend without any end-to-end testing. And this is what we'll be creating a copy of to add our own, like to do our own setup. This is a fully configured Cypress setup running and testing this backend. So we will be basically replicating this one. So by creating a new folder and doing everything from scratch. And then this is just a basic front end in Vue using Vite as the dev server and the build tool. So just before we start, let's just quickly run these things just so you guys can see what it looks like to see what we will be testing. So I will go to the backend. Let's just see if we're in the right place. Okay, I will Ecto reset because I've been doing some stuff with it. Okay, and I will run the server. And that's working. So let's open a new folder, go to the front end, auto completion. And you would probably do npm I just to install the packages. I will just npm run the dev server. So the dev server is running at localhost 3000. The backend is at localhost 4000. All of that is set up, and we can probably like demo the app. So yeah, a basic login register. Let's register a new user. We are registered. We are listing our to-dos. We can add them, remove them, all that stuff. So this is working. It's not much, but it's working. So how do we go about testing this? So let's just start our new end-to-end testing setup. Let's go back to the root folder. So we are in the end-to-end workshop folder, and let's create a new directory. I recommend naming it this way because this folder has been added to git ignore. So like if you're using Git in your VS Code editor, you won't get like a bunch of added files and it will slow your things down. So, but you can technically name it any way you want. So let's name it this way for now. And usually what we would do here is we would go in there. npm init. I'll just quickly click through all the settings. So now that we have a package JSON, and then we would npm install basically just Cypress. That's all you really need. But in my case, I want to like be able to do this quickly because there's a lot of stuff we want to do and we are a bit short on time, probably. So I added a bunch of other things just so my code is automatically formatted and there's less such as of me like introducing bugs or anything like that. So rather than doing like all this, let's just go back to the root and copy these files from the end-to-end folder. Sorry, is it end-to-end? Oh, sorry. So this one, and then, sorry about the noise. I also have like some config files. So tsconfig, ElixirConfig ESLint and prettier. So we have all those. Let's go back to the workshop folder. Let's see if everything is copied correctly. Yeah, so we have it all here, and we can now run npm i. I'm not sure how long this will take now. Usually in the afternoon, my internet is not that great, but let's hope for the best. If anyone is actually following along, please do like unmute yourself for a second and let me know. I would like to know if I have followers.
I'm here. I'm following.
Okay. Okay. So we ran npm i. The packages are installed, and to open and to run Cypress at this point, we can just do npx Cypress open. Ignore the error in the terminal. That's just my graphic adapter messing with me. We've opened it for the first time. We have this UI, and Cypress detected that we have no specs, so it gave us some examples here. And these examples do not run on our own backend or frontend. They run on a site hosted by Cypress. So let's just open one of them to see what it looks like. As you can see, oh, hold on. Yeah, so it's opened the website, example Cypress.io, and it's running tests on it. So as you can see, it can do a lot of stuff. You can even draw on a canvas, things like that. So it's pretty great to use. And you see like which test passed, which didn't. And you can go back to a test and like go through every step and see what it looked like. You can get a snapshot of the DOM at that point. If there's a network request, you can click on it and it'll output into the console, and you can see like what the payload was, what the headers were, all that stuff. So there's a lot of debugging power here, and it runs pretty fast too. Like you can even speed it up further by like making your typing instant or something like that. There's a lot of options, but like these are not the tests we want to have. So let's delete these examples. First of all, I will close this so it doesn't recreate them for me. So we delete these examples. They are in integration examples. My right click wasn't working for a moment there for some reason. So yeah, I'll delete these examples. I will rename these files to TypeScript because we are want to use TypeScript. If you are not using it, you don't have to. So just leave it as is. And I will add a new test. Let's call it register spec because we want to test registration first. And we need, since we're using TypeScript, we need to add a reference to the Cypress global types. I think this is correct syntax. I don't remember really. Oh, sorry, I did not name it TS. Okay, I guess it is correct. And now we can start adding our specs. So we can do describe, register. Okay. In theory, if we run it now again, we should have this spec detected and it won't create examples for us anymore. So let's try. So yeah, as you see, it's here. If we open it, it'll tell us there are no tests, which of course is fine. So let's add a test. I don't really remember if it's it. I think it's it, not test. It registers a user. And now Cypress has this syntax where it gives you a sci object, which chains all the commands they support, like contains all the commands it supports within it, and they are chainable and you can use them in order, and they are guaranteed to execute in that order. So what we want to do here is we want to visit the register page. We want to find the input, and like trust me on this is the path to it. It's a CSS selector. Input name equals name. So that's the username. We want to clear it just in case something's in there, and then type, say, James. Let me just widen this a bit. Then we want to do the same with the password. So I will just copy this. And do my password. Anything is fine. This is a new user, so everything should be good. If you look at the code, the password is not encrypted in this example or anything like that. So we're just doing the naive approach here. Then we want to find the button to submit the form. And this is just button. And we want to click it. And then we want to check, best idea I have right now is to check that we are no longer on the register page because it went through. So sci URL should not contain register. And let's give this a try. So we're still here. This is still open. If I open it, it should detect these tests, and it will fail, just to be clear. Why it fails is because it doesn't know where register is. To know that, we need to give it a base URL, which we add to the Cypress JSON config. So base URL, remember this is JSON, so it needs the quotation marks. And as we said, the front end is at localhost 3000. So let's give it a try now. Okay, as you saw, it typed in the username and password, hit submit and register, and we created the user, and it works. We are on the to-dos page. However, if we try to rerun this test now, it will fail. Why? Post 422 users failed. So the post to users failed with a 422 error. Let's see if you can see the dev console here. Yeah, okay, I'll click it. Unprocessable entity. What is the response? The name has already been taken. Why? Because we are running just the basic development backend, and that user already exists in the database because it was created in the first test. So we need that plug thing I was talking about to reset the database after every test. So let's do that. We can close this, and we can now switch to our backend, which I will have to run in a separate VS Code. Actually, let's not forget, we need to create a copy of our backend, which we will add end-to-end to. So we copy backend initial. Oh, sorry, where are we? Backend initial to, again, workshop backend. As I said, again, you can name the folder any way you like, but this one is added to git ignore, so it won't mess with your change sets or anything like that. So we did that. Let's go to workshop backend. Let's get the dependencies. And now we want to set up our end-to-end environment. So I will open this in VS Code. And like my recommended approach here is to add a new environment, which is just end-to-end to like the list of environments. So let's add a new E2E EXS. Let's copy some stuff over from the other ones. So we want this. Of course, we need to use mix config. We need to set the environment to be E2E. And now from dev, we want the config for the endpoint, because we want the server to be running and we want the code reloader to be running, because we will be making changes and all that stuff is useful to have in the background. So the test, like this isn't clear from here, but if you go to the test config, you will see that that one is set to server false. So the actual server endpoint is not running here. But from the test config, we do want this, which is the repos config, which is set to run with sandbox. We just need to change the database name here to E2E. And now that we have this, let's try and compile and run it. It's going to take a while, but yeah, this is how we run it in the end-to-end environment, of course. So this is going to take a bit. And while we're doing that, I will open up our endpoint. So endpoint EX is the typical Phoenix endpoint. My hype CPU usage is affecting meeting quality, so sorry about that. I hope it's not too much. And we now want to add that plug here. So it's plug Phoenix Ecto SQL sandbox. The location is at sandbox. The header we want to use is also named sandbox. The default header is X user agent, so you can leave it at that if you want, but you will have to change how you follow me later. The timeout, and this is like how long the sandbox remains checked out before failing. I usually set to 60 seconds, but you can probably get away with shorter in this case. And then we need to give it the repo, which is to-do list repo. And we want to run this only in the end-to-end environment. Oh, and just to be clear, like, please make sure to do this after the head, because some of the stuff we will be using will rely on the parameters being fetched and all that stuff. So you will encounter bugs otherwise. So we want to use this only in the end-to-end environment. So I will check if we are in the end-to-end environment. And we do this, like, if you recall, we added this config value to the config. So I will check that. Okay, so let's move that in there. And that should be it. This is still compiling for some reason. It usually doesn't take this long, but we will have to wait for a bit, unfortunately. So why am I doing this way? Like, I can just do like if mix, like system get env mix env equals E2E. But the problem with that approach is that the system get env thing is evaluated only when you recompile this file. So since this is not in a function, like this is within the module definition, it won't detect when you change that flag. So once you compile it once, you will have to resave this file to get it to compile again and enable or disable sandbox behavior. So this runs a bit better and it's more reliable, but it also means it's check like on every run, unfortunately. Okay, so this failed and I expected this to fail. The reason for that is, as you recall, we enabled code reloading in the end-to-end environment, but here it says the library loader is not available. The reason for that is in mix EXS, the Phoenix library load library is set to only run in dev. So if we add E2E here, that should just be working now. Or not, because I'm running another server, sorry. Now it should be working. Okay, yeah. So we have the backend now running in end-to-end, but the front end doesn't care about that because we need to use that sandbox header and use those endpoints. So how do we do that? We need some way to, before every test, send that post request to that sandbox endpoint, and after every test, clear it out, and during the test to use that sandbox header. So Cypress allows us to do this via custom commands. Commands are something, so in this case, visit, get, clear, type, all those are commands. And we can do custom commands in the following way. So Cypress, commands, add, let's call this one checkout sandbox. And it's just a callback, a function. And what we want to do within it is make a request to our backend and do a post request. Let's just quickly set our backend URL into a constant. Again, typing it incorrectly. So as we said, the backend is at localhost 4000. And now we just do site request. This is another built-in command. method is post. URL is API URL sandbox. And then we get a response. And typo. We want to store the response body, which is the sandbox ID, into some place where we can fetch it later. And that some place is Cypress env. This is the test environment, like the one for your test. So you can put anything in there and fetch it out later. And let's call the key sandbox ID. And as I said, it's response body. So this is the checkout sandbox command. Let's do a use sandbox command. And that one, again, uses a built-in command. As I said, Cypress makes this very easy, called sci-intercept. And like we give it a URL, which can be a pattern. And if this pattern is matched, then it will intercept any request to that URL and do something to it. So the URL pattern, in this case, is, again, API URL. And then we have just add a wildcard, which is 2 asterisks. I'm not sure what this character is called in English, sorry. And then, again, like this is the config on what we intercept. And then we get a callback function, which gives us the request. And in that request, if we have a sandbox ID, we add it as a header to the request. So get a sandbox ID. Cypress. Sorry. And then if sandbox ID, request, headers, sandbox, because if you recall, that's what we told the plug that the name of the header will be, equals sandbox ID. And then we just continue. So this is the use sandbox command. And then the last one we need is the check-in sandbox, which, as we said, is a delete request to the sandbox endpoint. So let's call it check-in sandbox. Again, a callback. And we can just copy this and modify it a bit. So method delete. We need to add the header, because this is like from within the test, so the intercept won't work. And we don't need the then. That isn't required here. So these are the commands we need. We want to use them, but since, and this, if you're not using TypeScript, this won't be an issue for you, but I am. And if I try to use it here, it doesn't recognize it. So I will have to add it as a definition to, as a custom definition to, I have to add a definition module here. So index. And then in this one, we do this by doing declare namespace, Cypress, and then interface chainable. It's a generic, so I'll just call the generic variable subject. And then we don't need the subject now, but I might need it later, which is why I'm adding it now. So one of the commands is checkout sandbox, which is a function, and it returns a chainable void. And similarly, check-in sandbox and use sandbox. So all of them are here. And we should now be able to use them. So before each, we need to sci checkout. Oh, sorry, I need to add a reference as well. So support, there's an index DTS within support, and TypeScript will automatically recognize that. So checkout sandbox, So I use sandbox, and then in after each, check in sandbox. So we added these, and now let's see if our register test can be repeated. I will, however, have to reset our database because it's already been corrupted due to trying to rerun the test, and there's like that one user in there. And let's go back to the Cypress folder. And try npx. Let's see if this is running. It is. So I did npx Cypress open again. We have the spec here. Let's try to run it. Okay, it passed once, or it's not very visible. I have I intentionally zoomed in so you guys can see it a bit better. Let's try again. So the test is passing every time. And that's great. So we have repeatable tests. The database resets after every test, and it all works, right? That's great. So let's add a login test now, just to illustrate another difficulty we will experience. So I will close this. I can keep this open because it'll auto detect that we have a new spec. And let's add a new spec. Oh. Okay. I will just copy this to speed things up. So the register spec, move it here. Let's rename it login. So load is the same. And so how would we write a login spec? We need to log in as an existing user, except the database is reset and we don't have an existing user. So how do we create one? Well, right now, the only way to do it is to first register a user. And since registering also logs us in, we need to log out as well. So again, trust me on this. This is the CSS for the log out button. And now we can visit login. And then we do something similar to this, except all the classes are now login. And again, we are registering the James user, and we will be logging in as James. And now we need to check that does not contain login. So let's see. As you can see, the login spec is already here. Cypress is really good at this stuff where you can just test things out fast. Let's remove the scrolling. Okay, so it logs us in. As you can see, it first registers, logs out, and then logs us in. And that's great, but this is not great, the fact that we need to do this every time. So ideally, we would have some sort of create command where we create the user and then just try logging in using that user without actually doing this. So that's the next thing I will add to our backend. Now, I already have a test environment where I'm running tests using Ex Machina as a factory tool. So Ex Machina is a library which allows you to quickly create records using just simple commands rather than going through like the actual business logic to do so. Okay, I didn't have to run this. I will just show the tests. Otherwise, we will wait forever for it to compile. So let's go to our backend and find an example test. Okay, say controllers, user controller. So create user, probably not a good one. Let's try something else. Accounts test. So list users. This is the way we just insert a user, and then we assert that the list of users is equal to that one user. So this is an Ex Machina factory, and we define those. Let's just find it in this module, and this is how it works. So each factory is just a X factory function, which provides us with a description, so to say, of how we would build this record. So in this case, we use a sequence and for the name and the password. which is based on the index of that record being created. Similarly for the user, for the to-do, except a to-do also has an association with the user. Now, the problem with this, if I want to use, ideally, I would use this from the front end, right? So I would add an endpoint which just attacks this, so to say, uses this factory. But the problem is from the front end, I can send a user ID, or I can send the user as a map. But when Ex Machina is inserting things, it checks, like if we give it a map or a struct, it will only understand that the record already exists if it's a struct with an ID and it's said to be loaded from a database. In that case, it will just associate. Otherwise, it will try to create that record. So if I want to create a to-do and give it a user as an association, it will try to create the user even though it already exists. So we need some sort of custom factory, which is mostly like this, but has this like custom behavior where it will figure out that a record with an ID should exist in the database. So this takes a bit to implement, and we don't have time for that. So because of that, I will just take the implementation I already have and copy it over here. So the factory, is called Sandbox Factory. It's in backend test support, and I want to copy it in this folder's test support folder. And another thing we want is the plug, which exposes the endpoint to hit the factory, and that one is in plugs factory plug. And again, I will just copy it over here. So we have these two things. I will just now show them. So there's a lot of comments here because I want people to be able to understand this from the repository itself. But basically, for the user, we just use the base factory, so the one I already showed. And for the to-do, we have this associate by ID function, which finds the ID and loads that struct, and then replaces the key containing the ID with the struct, so Ex Machina will know that this already exists. And then we just do build, which is base factory build. So again, we just restructure the arguments a bit and then call the basic build function. And this then works. And then the second thing we do is we have this plug, which exposes a factory endpoint with a post request. It expects a schema and a set of attributes. As a bonus, it optionally expects a count, which allows you to like create a list of records, but we won't be tackling that today. And then it takes all that stuff, converts to atoms because the Ex Machina factory functions expect atoms, and just calls the factory function. And then that just works. So we need to add this plug to our endpoint, the same way we added the sandbox plug. So let's go to endpoint. We added after Todoist factory plug, and that's it. It's now here. And if we now try to run our backend again, it will fail again. Why? Similar reason as before. Oh, actually, I think my path to my module is incorrect. Hold on. So that's the first reason. No, it's not. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I was misled. So similar, but not quite the same reason. It doesn't know where this module is because, again, mix EXS, we are compiling the test support path only for the test environment. So if we add envs here, it should now get past that hurdle, but we'll have another issue. And the issue now is, hold on, did I do something wrong? No, let's see if it's in the correct place. It is. I think I need to resave it. Hold on. I'm not sure why that is now. Hold on. I think I need to resave the endpoint, maybe. Sorry. Does anyone have an idea?
Back to the mix file.
Did I make a typo?
That's to be
Oh,
E2E.
sorry. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, so this will go through now, and then we'll have another failure. And this is the same as with library loader before. It doesn't know where Ex Machina is. So we need to add it to the dev environment. We have it here. Again, it's set to only test this time. So we add E2E, not end, as before. Okay, and now it should be running. And we have this running now. So now we should, let's just see if the test is still running. Okay, quickly. Okay, it works still. So we need that command to quickly create a user, right? So let's figure out how to do that command. So we go to commands again, and we add a new command. Just open this up a bit. So Cypress commands add create. So I just call it create. And this one is a post request like this, except the URL is factory, and it needs to contain the headers. So we add that too. And we want this time for it to return something, right? Because we will probably be using those records that get created, and the endpoint is returning like a serialized record that it creates. So we could do then and do like something like this, response body. But for cases like this, Cypress already gives like a custom command called its body. So that will return the body of the response. And that's all we need here. So let's go back to our log. Actually, we first need to add this as a command again. And in this case, let's make it a bit more strongly typed. Let's say this is a record, t equals record, actually t equals any. Let's see if it allows that. And then this is a partial of t. I will explain why. Sorry, the schema, I was wrong here. I need to add a body to the command, sorry. One moment. So yeah, this is not enough, of course. We are just sending a blank post request. We also need a body. I don't know why I missed it. So body. And if you go back to the endpoint, let's see, it's not here. Hold on. Factory plug. So it expects a schema, which is a string, and an attributes, which is an object, a map. So schema, attributes. But we don't have those, so where do we get them? We pass them in as params for this. Schema, which is a string, attributes, which is a, let's say, record of string unknown. So record means basically an object where the key is a string and the value is unknown. It's actually, unknown. Okay. So this now accepts parameters. So let's add this as a definition here. So schema string attributes is partial of t. I will explain why in a minute. And then it returns a chainable t. Not partials, just partial. So what are we talking about here? If I'm sending attributes to the backend, I will send a map, but I will get back a map that contains those attributes, but also the ID of the record in the database. So it returns the full record, but it accepts as a parameter, as a set of parameters, a partial record of that. So we've added this. It's complaining about these because they're not really used, so it's not completely perfectly typed. But we can now use scicreate. So scicreate user name James, password my password. And this can now go away because we don't need to register anymore. What we could do is, since the front end is a single page application, it's a bit nicer if we had something like we visit the actual app at the root, and then we click the login button in the navbar. So this is the login button in the navbar. It's a link. So that should start us off at the root and then take us to the login page, and then we proceed with the login. So let's see how this works. I think I did something wrong. Are we using the correct? Oh, this is the issue. I might have to restart the database now because the test didn't complete correctly. Yeah, I'm afraid so. Hold on. Let's quickly reset. It's running. Let's try again. Am I missing something again? James password. Let's, for now, in the interest of time, keep it as just visiting login directly. Okay, seems to be working that way. So let's leave it at that for now, just because we're slowly running out of time. But yeah, this now works and we can create records. So let's just give an example on how we would test listing to-dos. So new file, not total to-do. So we have this, and now we get a slightly uglier syntax. So we again have to log in, but the problem here is we need to create a user first and then use that user to create to-dos for him. Issue there is like the Cypress chainable interface is not compatible with await async. So we have to do then here. So we have a user now in this place. Let's just format this a bit more nicely. So in this block, we will now have a user. So we will be able to log in and continue with that. So here we can now create to-dos. Let's buy milk. And it's a user. This is the user. Sorry, missing syntax. And write homework, because that's important. Okay, we need to log in again. I will make this nicer in a minute. And then we need to check that there's 2 to-dos on the page. I think it's linked. I keep mistaking linked and count, but we'll see. Let's see. There's a to-do spec here. Okay, it found 2 to-dos, as you can see. So it passed. The test passes. We should be able to restart it. Still works. So in a similar fashion, we could do a delete test or basically anything else. But we still this isn't that nice yet, right? So a good pattern that I've used that I would recommend using is to have a model. So a single object that models your application, how the selectors work and all that stuff, maybe define some actions. And then you can reuse that across your test to quickly do like commonly done things. So let's add a new file. Let's call it app model. This is the page object pattern, by the way, if you want to Google it or something. So we define a class, which we need to export. And let's say it has, like this is something we use all the time. So it has a login function. And it takes a name. And it logs in, but not with the default, but with those name and password values. Okay, so we're here. And now we create a new app model. And we should now be able to app login. We can remove this. Did I do something wrong here? Oh, maybe because it's not public. Oh, we're missing username and password. So James, my password. Where is the test? Here it is. Let's see if it's still working. So it works, and the test is now much shorter, right? So this is the page object model, and we can do way more with that. Of course, we could, I don't know, define a nav bar in the page object. We could have like an open function, a register function, a logout function, a create to do function, everything basically. So anything that is repeated multiple times across different tests, we could add in there and keep our tests short. One thing you have noticed during this is that like this, if the test fails, this won't run. And since the timeout is 60 seconds, it'll take a while before the database resets. So it's just quicker for me to like reset it manually. But a good idea generally is maybe to run this at the start of every test as well. So like at least the next test will reset the state for the previous one. And outside of that, and this is something I won't be adding like as part of this exercise, but I have in the original like fully implemented backend. I find this useful, though it's probably not a good investment of time. Let's see, where are we? Oh, here it is. So original backend, we have another plug here. It's called Sandbox Enforcer. And the basic idea is it will check if basically it will only allow requests without a sandbox if they hit the sandbox creation or deletion endpoint. And all other requests will fail automatically. So you don't accidentally like send in a request without a sandbox ID and like that state is then persisted to the database and you have to reset it manually. So this is something that is useful at the start like of a project while you're still figuring out the commands and all the behavior, but probably not that useful later. So that's one thing I tend to do, but it's probably not that important. But yeah, that's, I think, about it. And we are like 5 minutes before the end of time. So let's go back to our slides and ask if there are any questions. I will switch to, actually, I will stay here and you guys can read the questions for me if you can, if there are any. So everyone can see the slides still. Oh, one quick note, this other repository, so E2E recipes, contains like this implementation for a couple of other front-end frameworks as well, using like different testing suites. So there's an example for Angular, for React, for the Test Cafe suite, things like that, if you're interested. Any questions?
Hi. So we have some on the Q&A. I can read them.
Okay.
So one, what are the alternatives to Cypress for E2E testing if I'm unfamiliar with TypeScript or JavaScript?
So on Phoenix directly, there's Hound and Wallaby. They both are able to run the browser, and they directly use the Ecto sandbox. So you don't have to do this plug approach. So if your app, like if your front end is part of the Phoenix project and not separate, you can easily use that. Outside of that, Hound and Wallaby. Wallaby is with 2 L's. I recommend Wallaby because it's using Chrome as the WebDriver. Hound is a bit older and out of date, and it requires like you can use Chrome by default. It relies on Phantom.js, which is dead now. So like you can use Chrome with both, and you can use both today effectively, but I personally prefer Wallaby. And as for like separate frameworks, I'm not really familiar with any that like will run your front end and don't rely on JavaScript, but there's like Puppeteer, Test Cafe, just WebDriver, Selenium, all of those things basically.
Okay, thank you. So question 2, what would you say are the advantages of using Ex Machina factory versus writing your own fixtures?
I mean, I'm not sure there are that many. I'm used to Ex Machina, so I use that just because of that, and I'm used to the syntax and the approaches it uses. But like, if you have your own fixture, like modules, yeah, feel free to use those. They will work in much the same way. Ex Machina does have like a built-in way to use like built but not inserted records, and like it's a pretty like terse syntax, so it's quite like you are quick to write all your new factories. Like when you create a new record to your database, it's just a couple of lines of code to add a factory for it.
Okay, so is it the same case as using a framework or writing your own code?
You mean for factories? I would say it's pretty much the same. Maybe just like if you're used to Ex Machina, it's a bit simpler, bit quicker.
Okay, thank you. Question 3 from Nuku. How do you mimic as close as possible production load when doing end-to-end testing, and does this affect the quality of the test?
There are arguments for and against that. I would say like this, in this example, I'm using the dev servers because Cypress as a tool is great for something that you can run like yourself on your local machine while you're code, and it like runs continuously, and it immediately tells you if you broke something major. You could just as easily set up Cypress to run tests on your actual production deployed application. Like the examples you get when you install Cypress, they actually do that. They run tests on a website hosted remotely somewhere. So you could do that, but in that case, you lose the advantage of being able to set up your own like data cases. So like this whole plug approach doesn't really work because you would have to expose a factory plug in production, which I would not recommend. But there are like there's a middle ground there where you could, I don't know, set up this as continuous integration. For which I have an example of how to run this on GitHub Actions. It's in the code in the repository, so feel free to check it out. Or you can maybe run it in staging, where you could expose sandbox endpoints, or just basically you could just run it on an actual application and like set up your data manually, set up data scenarios for yourself manually, like create a test team, test user, and have those be available.
Thank you. We have one from Peter. How does Elixir determine the order to execute the test, assuming they are sequential?
Well, Cypress is the one doing the ordering here, and I'm honestly not that sure how it runs. I think tests within a module are sequential, but there's some support for parallelization. But I'm reasonably sure that in this case, like with this example setup, like some extra work will be required to be able to run tests in parallel and like check out multiple sandboxes at the same time. This is more suited for sequential running, I think.
Okay, a question from Okok. So what is the advantage of using this approach over using a library like Wallaby? I think you mentioned this.
I'm pretty well. The advantage, if your entire application is just a Phoenix application and the front end is like within the assets folder of your backend repository, then I would probably use Wallaby. I think Cypress is a bit more powerful with like when there's a lot of JavaScript on the front end and like you need to deal with like some custom behaviors. But in your basic example, I would go with Wallaby. Probably it's easier to set up. But if you have a repository like that's separate from your backend for your front end, if your front end is like a complex framework application, like a single page application, then I'm not sure you could do it with just Wallaby. you would have to do it with something like this.
Okay. Last question. What is the advantage of Cypress over the Phoenix integration test? From Manjika.
I would say, I'm not sure what we mean by integration tests here. If we mean just like controller tests or something like that, this tests more. This also tests that your front-end UI is working, because it actually mimics user behavior on the front-end UI. And it gives you some extra features that I didn't mention here. But for example, if you run Cypress in CI, you could have it record your tests. So you get videos of these things actually happening as if a user is doing them. And you can check out those videos, check why it failed, what's happening. It can create screenshots, and like with a sub sort of service, you can compare those screenshots. It can do a lot more things than just tests in controller or with Hound or Wallaby. And it's easier to debug if the application is front-end heavy. So if it's a complicated front-end app, then you have to debug JavaScript as well, and Cypress allows you that, while Wallaby really does not.